You're listening to On Mission with Dr. Matt Davis, a podcast designed to explore the personal mission of everyday leaders. Hear from men and women who are making a difference in their corner of the world and discover what keeps them on mission. Welcome to On Mission. I am Matt Davis, and today we are honored to have in studio one of our keynote speakers here in the Leader to Leader Conference, sponsored by the School of Business here at Maranatha, and his name is David Hoffeld. He is the CEO and Chief Sales Trainer at the Hoffeld Group. He is from Prior Lake, Minnesota. David and his wife Sarah have 3 children, ages 6 to 17, and his first job was at McDonald's. You are the second guest in 2 days whose first job was at McDonald's.
Oh, that's a common theme. Okay.
His favorite meal, also not McDonald's.
No,
Chinese food, and I am all for that too. My neighbors run the Chinese restaurant that's down the street from my house.
Oh, lucky! They bring you leftovers?
No, they're not that nice.
Oh,
but they're good neighbors to have. They work hard. They work really hard. Their whole family is involved. He enjoys working out and reading about longevity, business, behavioral science, influence, and theology. His favorite sports team is the Baltimore Orioles. David, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So, Baltimore Orioles, you live in Minnesota. Like, there's a lot of sports teams in Minnesota you could have chosen from, but you chose the Baltimore Orioles. How does a Minnesota guy end up as an Orioles fan?
That's a great question. So I grew up in Pennsylvania on the Pennsylvania-Maryland line.
Okay.
Up until I was 14, and I wanted to be a professional baseball player all the way up till I was a junior in high school. That was my dream. I worked incredibly hard at it. I played baseball pretty much all year round.
Really?
And the Baltimore Orioles were the team. Yeah, Cal Ripken. That was when Cal Ripken, for those baseball fans. Eddie record. Murray. Yeah. Oh, those were the fun times.
Well, you talk about reading about longevity. Cal Ripken was the Iron Man. He had the streak for the most number of games played, consecutively, never missed a game.
Yep. Anytime you go to the ballpark, you knew one thing: Ripken would be playing.
And he was a character guy.
Yes.
I mean, as part of the team, a leader, the kind of guy you could count on.
Yes.
Even in the later parts of his career when he wasn't quite as mobile. I think he shifted from shortstop to third base.
He did, yes.
Yeah. And, even in all of that, just the humility, he was really waning in his baseball skill, but still so valuable to have as part of the team with all of that wisdom and consistent character. So,
yes, inside the clubhouse for sure, and very active in the community to this day. Still a major factor in Baltimore. Yeah, he's created some baseball fields that young people will play at, and has tournaments, and so he's very, very active in Baltimore still. Yeah,
you could have worse role models. That's pretty good
for sure.
What position were you mostly playing?
Boy, I was at shortstop, and I pitched, and then when I got a little older, I went to first base.
Yeah.
And, I was passionate. I'm right-handed, but
wow.
I read when I was younger The Science of Hitting by Ted Williams,
Yep.
and that was one of the game-changing books for me. I copied what Ted Williams said, idolized Ted Williams as a young man. I swung the bat just like he did. I used to swing the bat. I had a mirror in my bedroom. I would swing constantly. I was obsessed with it as a young man, so it was...
Did you play in college?
I didn't. I was scouted in high school, and then I realized it wasn't going to happen. And so then when I went to college, then I started getting really serious about the Lord too, about that same time. And so my senior year, I kind of started focusing more on other things, and I let I still played baseball for fun, but I gave up the dream as a junior.
Well, Maranatha's baseball team is getting more games this year than we've ever had at this point in the season.
Yeah.
Like you mentioned in your keynote, it is the warmest winter, not just there in Minnesota, but here in Wisconsin as well.
Yeah.
And I did the same thing. I bought a brand new Ariens snowblower last year. It was so bad.
That's the brand I bought. Oh, yeah. I paid way too much. I researched it. I got the biggest one they had, and I'm like, let's go. I was
didn't
ready.
Go with the biggest, all right, but I went with the one that would fit through my door because I didn't want to. I had to literally change the hinges on the door into my garage so that it would swing completely clear because I had just measured frame to frame. And then I got this Ariens in, and oh no, it's 1 inch too big because the door itself was in there. So I found these like handicap accessible hinges that will. Isaiah knows, he's a construction guy. He knows all about this. But I went on Amazon. I found a solution. I was so proud of myself. Rehung the door, and now my snowblower fits right through. So,
but we never use it. That's the problem. I've got this snowblower. I mean, I was ready,
Yeah.
and I've used it once so far this winter, and so it's
got
like
lights. Does yours have lights?
It has
yeah.
everything. Mine has hand warmers.
Heated grips.
Yeah,
what's
yeah.
The use in living?
I could have rode it here. It's so big. I mean, I
You
was
didn't
so
go
excited.
For the tank treads, did you?
I
There
did
is a
not.
model that
No,
has those.
that was the one above mine
Yeah.
that I said, I'm not going to get the treads.
I
But
got the one hand turn, where the differential. Oh, man.
yes.
I can't
Those
wait
are fun.
for it to snow.
I know. I've been so upset. I hate winter, except this year I'm like, bring it.
Yeah.
And
We were ready.
nothing.
I guess it's our fault.
I know.
Or we can
caused this.
take credit.
Somehow.
Yeah,
Yeah.
some people are happy about
That's
it.
true.
All right.
It's been nice.
So this is the On Mission podcast, and we talk to people like yourselves that are about something bigger in life, that have achieved some measure of success in the business world or in ministry, and approach it with an intentionality of trying to make a difference.
Yeah.
And so I'm curious from your perspective how you articulate your personal mission in life.
Yeah, so I think we get that right from Scripture, right? We're called to be God's ambassadors, and we're called in everything we do to bring glory to God. And so my focus is really to use my business, and I train people. I invest in people. That's what I do as a trainer. And so I want to build people up, but it gives tremendous opportunity because as you speak into people's lives, people are very receptive to talk, and they share very personal things in coaching sessions. Even with like salespeople, I'll often learn very, very personal things about them that they'll freely disclose because they trust me and they know I'm there to help. And there's no agenda except helping them get better. That's the only agenda. And so it really opens up tremendous ministry opportunities. And that was something that I did struggle with early on, is because I had originally went to school and I got my master's degree and I was going to go into formal ministry inside of a church. And as I got into business, originally I felt a little guilty about it. Like I should be, I'm not doing ministry anymore. And then I corrected my thinking. It was really, I realized that there is in the scriptures no difference in sacred and secular. Everything is sacred.
Right.
Everything is God's. And though it's wonderful to be a pastor or a teacher, most people who won't go to church. They won't come to a wonderful college like this to learn about the Lord. So you have to go to them. Yeah. And so I look at it almost as being a missionary to the business world. And God has seen fit to bless in some really impactful ways and given me an audience and a platform. And so just really trying to use that to glorify Him and bring honor to Him through everything I do. And for me, it really starts with number one thing is do good work. To start to do your best, to have value that you can give people. And so I work exceptionally hard on every time I interact with someone, I want to be able to give them value and make a positive impact in their life. Because I think that's step number one for me.
I had the opportunity to travel recently to India, and we did a number of chapel sessions and had a graduation. Their academic calendar is a little different than ours, mainly because they're pretty near to the equator and it gets pretty hot after, say, March. So, it was only 105 when I was there.
Wow.
But they tell you in Celsius, so it doesn't seem like it's so hot. And I had a hard time converting that until I walked outside, and it was like a blast furnace. But one of the topics that we talked about was biblical excellence. And you brought this concept up in your keynote here for the Leader Leader Conference. And you cited Colin's book in terms of the very first page where he talks about good being the enemy of great.
Yes.
The Bible uses that same kind of contrast. I think about Philippians 1:10, where Paul's praying for his believers, his children in the Lord, and says, I'm praying for you that you would learn to approve the things that are excellent. And one of my pastors once said, most lives are extremely common because of choosing the good over the great, over the excellent, as the Bible would say. And that concept has so many applications in every area of our lives. You talked about, you like to work out, you like to read, you're always expanding your toolkit. And I imagine that personal discipline is part of your pursuit of that kind of excellence personally and privately. But then how does that play itself out, sort of emanate from your personal choices and your personal discipline into your workplace decisions and what you have to offer to your clients?
Yeah, so I'm really blessed that my work is I'm interacting with people and trying to help them get better. So I model that because it's caught as much as taught.
Okay.
And so this philosophy is ingrained in all of our trainings, and it's that pursuit of excellence, and it's leveraging, in my case, some of the latest scientific research of how our brains work and how do we really serve people and not get in the way of business interactions, which is so often happens because we don't understand how our brains form decisions, so we trample on that process and we make it harder for people and create unnecessary friction. And so for me, it's all about doing that hard work of really, which took years upon years of really understanding this science, because it's not an easy thing to acquire. I mean, it's a decade-long pursuit before you can even be competent in it. I mean, and then to apply it to sales, I had no one to mentor me or help me with that because no one else was doing it at the time.
Really?
And so it was a radically new idea, which is why I attracted Penguin Random House, the biggest publisher in the world, published both my books, because it was such a groundbreaking idea, the idea of using sales and science. So in my books, for example, both of them, there's over 400 different citations to scientific journals, which if you ever read a sales book, there's usually zero. There's no citations.
Right.
And so you can fact check me. You can see, well, I want to get more into that, or where'd you get that idea from, or how'd you create that model? I want to see some of that early research on that you can verify on your own. So it's that transparency and coming in there saying and demonstrating, hey, I've done my due diligence.
Yeah.
I've done the hard work. Now I expect that from you. And people respond to that, right? They people want to get better. Oftentimes they just don't know how. And when you show them the how, right, and they understand the why, people will respond in amazing ways, and you can transform people's lives. I mean, so it's such a blessing to see how people's lives can be transformed sometimes in a day of working with me. They can transform their career, which influences every area of their life, right? It transforms their family and influences so many things. And now they're hungry for more, and that gives you the opening now to begin the dialogue about more spiritual things as well.
Man, there's a lot to track through in what you just said, and that's I have so many questions about what your approach is and how that works. But you talked about your role as sort of a I don't know if you consider yourself a coach or a confidant to salesmen that are trying to improve their craft, trying to be more effective in sales. Why be the advisor if you've got all the tricks and tips? Why don't you just go out and become the world's greatest salesman yourself and, retire to Belize or wherever you want, some desert, some beautiful island paradise, I mean, that's always the question in my mind when I talk to somebody who's got all the answers. Why don't you just, find the greatest product and be the greatest salesman yourself?
I like to think before I started my firm, I was the greatest salesman in the world.
Well, okay.
But I guess really for me, it was more about impact rather than, when I was young, money is very attractive. Money's fun to make, but eventually, right, money doesn't bring you fulfillment. The only people that think that don't have money, right? Eventually, it gets old. So for me, it became more about how can I impact people, and plus, I have a passion for this. I have a passion about training and investing in people, and the reason I really got started in applying the science was because, as I mentioned, no one was doing it. And I thought, boy, I was using this and getting results, and then I got promoted and was training my sales teams, and I got promoted again and worked for a number of great companies. But it's like, man, this should be everywhere. Like, this is so much better than the anecdotal, traditional methodologies that are shallow at best and outdated at worst. And so I thought someone needs to do this. And so I just have a passion. Like, when I talk about it, time flies. I mean, I can talk all day long and it feels like 10 minutes. I just love it. And I see results from it, and I love investing in people. I think it's fun to make a lot of money, and it's fun, but for me, I mean, it's more than the money. It's about really serving people, and I think this is what God has called me to as well.
Well, that's exactly what I wondered about as you were talking about the transition from pursuing ministry training and then maybe this new path that opens up, which you're blazing a trail. So that didn't exist when you were a teenager considering career paths. You didn't have this one because it wasn't a thing.
Wasn't a thing at all, no.
So when we talk about the pursuit of a ministry as a vocation, we're oftentimes using the term calling.
Yes. And
particularly that God has called me into ministry. And that's a wonderful concept, and I believe a very biblical concept. And it's a truth that needs to be evident if someone's going to have any sort of longevity or success in ministry. They better be called.
Yeah.
But we oftentimes don't use that term as much or quite as spiritually, if I could put it that way, when we're talking about secular vocations.
Yeah.
So when you made that transition from all the preparation that you put in to get an MDiv, which is not an insignificant task, and then, no, I'm not going to do pulpit ministry, I'm going to do this. How did you process that? What was your approach? And I'm sure that had to have an emotional element. Certainly spiritually, you had to be convinced this is really what God wants me to do. There had to, I would guess, there had to be some questions in your mind about, am I doing the right thing? And did I make a mistake? All of those kinds of things that when we make a change,
Sure.
Can naturally come up. So I'm very curious to know how you approach that.
Yeah, it was a process.
Okay.
It wasn't a moment. It was a long process of just feeling like this was the right thing for me, and then kind of testing the waters and going in, and then just kind of initially when I felt leaning to get more into business and pursue that, it was just kind of by faith, like that this seems like the right thing, but I feel like I'm not doing ministry anymore. That was, and right. Because I think oftentimes people feel like those in business are kind of second class. Like ministry is done within the church walls. Many people feel like, and I think that's not accurate. Ministry is certainly done within the church walls, but like Ephesians 4 says, we have pastors and teachers are there to equip God's people for works of service. And so we're going to go from the church and the church walls and the building and be sent out into the world. And so it was a process, though, and God was very gracious and gently took me along, but I questioned it for years.
Yeah.
Just to check and see, okay, is this really from God or is it just me? And what's really motivating this? To make sure, as you mentioned, it's not about the money. It's really about following Him and serving Him. And yeah, He just confirmed it along the way. I think one of the big things that really cemented it was like the book. When I got a book deal, I was not expecting that. That kind of just fell in it was totally a God thing. I didn't pursue it at all. They called me. So it was very hard to write a book, but it was very easy to get a book deal because it was just I can't take any credit for it at all, besides doing the prep work. But as far as getting an agent and getting a book deal, it was just God just handed it to me on a silver platter. It was actually a miracle.
Well, I don't want to discount God's work in it or the talent and dispositions that you have, but you must have put a tremendous amount of work into your craft.
Yes.
To go from having zero training, not evident on your resume anyway, that you have any training in psychology or business or sales. I'm sure you've been to many different things and made that your effort. So that's what I'm getting at, is that how do you go from all of the specific training for ministry to establishing some sort of expertise and success in a completely diverse field?
Oh, I see what you're asking. Yeah, so that is just tremendous work.
Yeah.
And it's putting your nose to the grindstone for a decade. Wow. That is foot on the gas. So I went all in as far as workload, and I became obsessive with it. I wanted to, because I thought this is a way to really serve people, and this needs to get out there, and so I was very passionate about it. I enjoyed it, but I put a tremendous amount of time into it, and hard work, especially in the early on for years, not knowing if it would ever pay off. Like not knowing that this moment would ever happen, that I'd have a book, that I'd be interviewed by you, that I'd be invited to conferences, I'd lecture at business schools. I had no knowledge of that, so it was really walking by faith. But and like I mentioned in the keynote, there's always a price for success, and you always pay that up front.
Yep.
And it's usually more than you want to pay in time, in effort, in sacrifice.
Certainly more than most people want to pay.
It was more than I wanted to pay.
I say all the time, if it was easy, guys, everybody be doing it.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yes.
So especially on the hard days, I have to remind myself, like, embrace. Not, people say embrace the challenge. The Navy SEALs say it a little bit differently.
Yeah. It's that grit.
Yeah.
You don't let setbacks stop you. When you commit to a goal, you're gritty. You pursue it. And so I have that personality with everything I do. I don't do moderation well, which I don't at all. So I'm either
balance,
all or nothing.
Balance is
a problem. Yeah, I'm working on it. I'm getting older. I'm getting a little better at balance. But in my 20s and 30s, yeah, when I go all in, I go all in. So it's foot on the gas all the time. And I've matured a little bit, and I've taken the foot off the gas somewhat and can coast a little bit and relax, focusing on growth, but not to an unhealthy place.
But look at our society right now. Everybody wants equality. They want to step in and immediately have everything sort of handed to them, that they're recognized and granted leadership and autonomy and workplace, independence, and they don't want to pay that price.
Right.
And they look at somebody who's successful and they think that somehow that just fell in your lap.
Right.
And it's like, no, you've got to be willing to pay the price for what it took to get there.
Yes.
And you're not going to have that on day one.
Oh,
you don't deserve that. Nobody deserves success, right?
You got to earn it every day. Yeah.
And then you have to fight to keep it, right?
You do, and it's hard to achieve it. I mean, it's very difficult. But then the way I look at it now, and the way I looked at it even then, was I embraced kind of like, good, I'm glad it's hard. Right? Bring it. Because it should be. Things that are meaningful are always hard. A great marriage is hard, right? A great relationship with your kid. There's extra work you have to do to be great at anything. And it's like, what would it be like when that is achieved? Okay, is it worth? Is the juice worth the squeeze? And for me, it was. And so I went all in for years and years and just grinded. And sometimes that's what you have to do.
And the believer has a different time scale involved too, that we're looking at an eternal investment. And probably the most difficult thing about that is that we may never see the return on that investment. Mm-hmm. Well, let me hit you with a Bible verse that I think really, to me anyway, God's used to really reveal that idea that ministry takes place, I would say primarily outside of the four walls of the church.
Yeah.
James chapter 1, verse number 27 says, "Pure religion and undefiled before God and the Father is this, to visit the fatherless and the widows in their affliction, and to keep himself unspotted from the world." And if you look into that word religion, it's not used in the English Bible very much. In fact, this might be the only place. But the word is really worship. Worship?
Yeah.
So pure worship. I mean, we think of worship like the worship service.
Yes.
Music, definitely a part of that. God's word being preached. Maybe, the elements, the ordinances within the church. We think, these are worship elements. We go to church to worship, and that's true. I mean, that's undeniably true. Corporately worship. But God's word says, guys, it doesn't just happen on Sunday morning. It happens because you're not visiting the fatherless and widows at church. You have to go to them.
Right.
And by the way, it just says visit. Be there.
Yes.
Be present.
Yes.
Be in the moment. Like, put your phone down. I mean, it doesn't say that, but it's in the Greek. Like, put your phone down and be there.
Yes.
And you may not know what to say. You may not have the great answer. There might not be an answer. Yeah. These are grieving people, suffering loss. Just be there. And maybe God will lay something on your heart that you actually could say or do. And then he says, keep yourself unspotted from the world. Well, this is definitely that 9 to 5, that out in the world, that be different, that Christians live as lights in darkness. Get out there in the darkness so that you can shine. And I resonate with this so much, and I talk about this all the time with our School of Business, that we're trying to prepare you to be missionaries in places that missionaries can't go.
Right.
And you need to be credible and have a reputation that goes before you, and be a hard worker. And this conference has been really great. There's been a lot of moments where that message has really come through, none more than what you're talking about. And so you develop that expertise, and now I would say what you're doing is you're discovering natural truth about the created order, about how God created us psychologically and other ways. And I had no idea what you would say coming into that. And very rarely do I stand there with my phone taking pictures of slides and sending them to people, but I found myself doing that constantly during your session because it was so rich with truths that are just like aha moments. Like, yeah, that explains why I feel that way many times.
Yeah.
You talked about the paralysis of not having of the single choice, right?
Yes.
What do you call it? The single choice.
Single option aversion.
Single option aversion. And that the sort of unexpected twist on that was, you said because we perceive only having one choice as being too risky. That concept of risk. How much do you think risk drives us in our choices? You know, you talk a lot about the science of buyer behaviors and things like that and how to influence those. How much of that does it just come down to risk?
A lot. Our brains don't like risk because none of us want to be a guinea pig. None of us want to try something out and let's see if it works. There's safety in contrast, there's safety in numbers. So we like to have decisions that I can predict what's going to happen. Right? And so risk means I have a struggle with what's going to happen. I'm not sure. Well, I probably don't want to make that decision, especially when we have really the number one obstacle to change is that status quo bias. We also talked about the tendency to remain in our current situation. And that's why I tell business owners, you know, the number one competitor you have is nothing, not someone. And same when we want to make changes in our lives. Let's say you want to exercise more, or eat differently. Well, that's hard. Why is it hard? Because you're not doing it now. You have to change your behavior, and our default is what we're currently doing, right? It's hard to go against that. But there's a number of things, some really interesting science that tells us things we can do. We talked about a few of them today in the keynote. But yeah, contrast can help create decision clarity, right? Sometimes you're presented with one option. Do I like it? I mean, it looks nice. I don't know. But if I see a second option right next to it, well, I like this one better than that one. And that win lowers my perception of risk, creates certainty, and now I feel, yeah, this is the right one for me. Whereas when it's just one option, oftentimes, especially when it's something new, where our brain struggles to find that comparison, and we're like, well, I've never done that before. I don't know if I want to risk it, right? We assign a lot of pain to making a decision and it working out badly. We assign more pain, our brain does. We're less likely to make a decision if I think it'll create pain and work out badly than if I stay with what I'm at and get the same outcome. That's a lot less painful to our brain as far as decision making. I'd rather stick with what I currently have, even if it's going to hurt a little bit, rather than take a risk and experience that same amount of pain. I'll stick with what I have. We're all like that, right? So, but that can be a problem for every part of our life when you want to make change. So what we're talking about is change management. How do we guide people through change? And some of the science is really eye-opening. We talked about some basic things today, but there are some amazing principles that we can apply to our life that really just allow us to better understand how God designed us. Oftentimes, as Christians, we kind of shy away from behavioral science, but all it's doing is explaining how our brains are wired and how we make choices, right? It's pure in that regard, so we can take it, and it oftentimes it illuminates. I'll learn something, or I'll read it in a journal, and I'm like, oh, there's a verse that talks about that,
of course,
right? Because, yeah, God designed us that way. So it's just helping uncover that and then applying it. How do we apply that? And it's so impactful.
So much of sales psychology or sales consultants' recommendations, it comes down to trying to trick buyers into making decisions, sort of maybe even some shady, sort of manipulative type things, or just flat out rah-rah motivation, right? I mean, these guys get all whipped up into a frenzy to go out and sell, and that only lasts for a few minutes, right? I mean, that can't be really ultimately motivating to generate sales in the long term.
Yeah, there's a lot of science that describes what's going on there. But yeah, you get buyer's remorse. We could talk about this all day long. But yeah, because they're influencing in one way, but they're not influencing in the way our brains are aligned to make decisions. And that's what I teach. Because when you come alongside someone and you understand I'll put it this way, when you ask salespeople, for example, what's the goal of a salesperson? Everyone agrees it's to help people make a buying decision. And then here's the stumper. How do people make a buying decision? Right. No one has right. That's the problem. So how do you do something when you don't know what that something is? Right. If I said, well, how do you build a car when you don't know what a car, I don't really know what it is. I know the idea, but I don't know what it's made of. That's the problem we're at. That's why sales is a train wreck. And so what we do is we show, okay, here's how our brains work. Here's how you come alongside people. You don't have to high pressure. You don't have to have rah-rah. You can come alongside them so that they have a decision they're going to feel good about the next day when they wake up. They're not going to be like, what did I do? Right? Because that's not influencing them in the way our brains are aligned to make a decision. If it was, that wouldn't happen. So it's a misalignment. And so that's exactly what we teach. There's science. It would take a while to unpack, but there's the different routes of influence that describe exactly why that occurs and what to do about it so it never happens. So incredibly impactful. So I found this is really a way to serve people. But think about the problem, as I just mentioned. How can you expect salespeople to do something when they don't know what the something is? I mean, if I don't know how a buying decision occurs, how do I guide someone through something? And I'm the guide, right? So that's a problem. That's why sales is historically, there's so many bad impressions of the profession, is because it's been horribly mismanaged, because there's that big discrepancy there. There's that huge amount of friction. And that's exactly what I address.
Well, let's talk about that profession for a second, because it probably does have a pretty bad reputation. Not quite as bad as lawyers, all right, but certainly not one that most people would relish. A lot of times, you see the salesman coming, and oh no, I gotta run. They're coming for my wallet, kind of a thing. So, what you deal with a lot of salespeople, and you probably have private conversations with many of them where they're sort of opening up maybe a little bit as you gain trust. What is that life like, and what are the particular stress points for them? Because a lot of these guys are reliant upon their own success to get a paycheck. They're contingent sales.
Right. Commission. They're commission based.
If they don't make a sale, they don't get paid.
Right.
And there's so much stress and pressure with that.
Sure.
Do you have to be a certain kind of person to be successful in sales, or is it the kind of thing that many different personalities could adapt to and be successful?
Many different personalities can adapt to it if you're well trained. So it's about the training, right? It's about the methodology. So yeah, there is tremendous pressure because it's performance based, and there's a number attached to it. So it's unlike most professions where you're graded every single day on what you do. There's a clear line for success or failure. Most professions don't have that attached to it with such clarity. But I think then there's also opportunity when you're well trained. And I think the way to look at sales is as service. So really understanding the person you're selling to, right? And there's a whole science to how do I get people to disclose information and questioning models and all kind of powerful things. But then once I do that, now I can share with them how my product or service, if it can help them, specifically how, and build value in their eyes so they perceive the value I'm presenting. And there's so much great research that speaks exactly to this. So when you're well trained, selling is a joy because you're just helping people. You don't have to high pressure. When people are high pressured, it's a sign of a weak salesperson because no one wants to do that to someone. No one it's not fun for anyone involved, but it's desperation, right?
Yeah.
People get desperate.
Yeah.
And why are they desperate? Because they don't understand how to do it for the reasons we already talked about earlier.
And some of that is credibility, just knowing your product and knowing how it can be used as a solution to that issue. My wife and I went to a nice resort, and of course we got a good deal because they were trying to sell us timeshare type thing or whatever. So we went through that pitch, and we went into it knowing full well what we were getting into and knowing full well we had zero intention of buying into it. And even on the legal side, I've actually had to help people get out of disastrous, long-term commitments and some of those. And it's hard once you're in. So I knew I wasn't going to do any of this, but I thought I'll just sit back and try and be objective about what's happening, study some of the tactics, just kind of see the science of this process that they've put together. And I can see that some of it was an appeal to, hey, we gave you this, nice excursion or this, thing now. You owe us,
some time. Yeah, they're buying time.
I felt like I owed them some time.
Yep.
I didn't feel like I owed them, $10,000 every year for a condo I wasn't going to use.
Right.
For 2 days in a condo or whatever they were selling. But the last guy that comes in was so aggressive and just almost abusive.
Oh, really?
And of course, my approach at that point, still trying to be objective, was just, wow, this guy's the closer. Okay. And I just smiled and I said, well, we can sit here as long as we want. I do feel bad about wasting your time because I'm not going to, purchase. And there are a lot of other people here. You might better, go get them. I'm not your guy.
Yeah.
And once he saw that I wasn't into it, I wasn't
done.
being influenced, he kind of huffed and, shook his the sleeve of his thing at me. I'm like, what was that? And just marched away, and I said, oh, we're free to go, huh? So we had our little thing stamped and off we went. We had our little sailboat excursion after that for free.
Okay.
But those kinds of tactics are such a put off.
Yes.
And people just gear up and they brace up almost like it's me against you.
Yes.
But you seem to be describing a completely different paradigm for sales.
Radically different. Yeah, because there's a science that describes what's happening there and why that kills influence. When you feel that someone is pressuring you to do something, it's called reactance. A good example of this that we can all relate to is if you walk past a sign that says, "Don't touch wet paint," what do you want to do?
Well, I always touch it.
You want to touch the wet paint. Let's think about that. When you touch wet paint, what happens? You get paint on your finger.
Yeah. Now I wipe
That's
it
not
on
good.
something else.
Right. Or yourself, right? You got to wash your hands. These are all negative outcomes. No one wants paint on them, yet a sign that tells us not to do something inspires us to want to do it. And it's interesting. So the same thing can be applied when you're influencing people. When they feel pushed, they instinctively push back. Oh, I don't want to touch wet paint until you tell me not to. Now all of a sudden I can't resist it. I want to put my hands in that wet paint, right? Because you said don't do it, or the sign says don't do it. And so we need to think through what's going on there and how do we make sure that doesn't happen. So that's called reactance. It's been studied for the last 40 years because it kills influence. If you want to destroy influence, create reactance, which is the feelings of high pressure. Because as soon as, if I feel pressured by you to do something, I'm going to push back. Your influence is diminished, and I'm going to try to get away. I'm trying to eject now, right? So the science that describes all this. So once we learn some of these principles, that's another heuristic we didn't talk about today, was reactance, because it kills influence. But once you understand some of this, you go, okay, I want to create urgency. I want to serve people, but I don't want them to ever feel that I'm pressuring them. You might have saw in the keynote today when I gave some examples, I used phrases like, of course, it's your decision. I might make a recommendation, but then it's your decision, though. The business case is still there, but now you don't feel that David is pressuring you to do anything, right? Because reactance is interpersonal. You're pressuring me to do something, I'm going to push back and reject it. And I might reject something I need simply because of how you presented it to me, creating that reactance.
I'm thinking back at different proposals that have been made to me since I've had positions of influence here at Maranatha. And, a lot of people want to sell to you when you have that position in a university, and people are nice to you and send you things and, tickets to ball games and stuff like that from time to time. And all of those, I recognize some of the psychology and what you're talking about too.
Mm-hmm.
But when I think back to some of the proposals that were made to me that went nowhere, that weren't very persuasive, they tend to be in this category of either one option, or most of them, the thing that comes in common is they didn't take the time to get to know me well enough to suit their proposed solution to meet that actual need.
Yes.
And I said, well, listen, that might work other places, but for me, that would be a disaster.
It works nowhere. Yeah, see, that's the problem. Imagine if you went to the doctor and you said, my arm's hurting, and the doctor said, which one? And you said, my right arm, and he said, okay, and wrote you a prescription. You'd be like, really? I don't think I trust that. But salespeople do that all the time, right? They'll just say, well, here's the solution without understanding the problem, right? So, that's always not going to be, it's not right, because you don't know that your solution is right. So sometimes you're going to walk away and say, you know what, based on what you shared with me, I don't think we are the best solution for you. I would recommend you look over here, right? Wow. That's ethics. Now, if you do that, let me tell you what happens if you do that. Number one, trust goes to an all-time high, and when the time comes and that potential client does need something, guess who they call? Or if they meet someone, guess who they're going to recommend, right? That's ethics. So sometimes it's disqualifying opportunities as well that you're not right for. No one's all things to all people, right? And so it's that integrity, and that's rewarded in our marketplace. The old, used car salesman stereotype from the 70s, that's hard to do now because we have a transparent marketplace. When someone's upset, who do they tell? They post it online. They tell everybody.
It immediately kills you. Yeah.
So now,
two bad reviews from some knucklehead could absolutely devastate your business.
So integrity is being taught more than ever in business schools, like Harvard Business School. They have an oath that the graduates will take, because there's been so many scandals in business over the last 20 years that now, and with our transparent marketplace, it's wonderful in the fact that it is forcing the hand of maybe some people that would not operate with integrity to have longevity or even a short career. You need to begin. Because we have a transparent marketplace. If you upset someone or mistreat someone, it has a ripple effect that can cost you your business and your career.
Well, let me return to the theme of ministry that you began with and how your approach to this is so intentional. You have an opportunity, because of the positioning of your business, to have private access and personal conversations with people. Does that ever lead to ministry opportunities that might be a little bit more overt even or explicit in terms of providing them with, the struggle that you're having isn't really psychological or business. It's actually, this is a spiritual issue. I'm curious about how those doors come open and what you do about them when you sense that that's what the Lord's leading.
Yeah, that does happen sometimes. So sometimes I will instigate in a couple ways. Sometimes they just, God opens those doors and people are extremely receptive because that trust has been built, right? Because I've given value and they look to me as an expert in this area. And so they allow you to speak into their life. People that would never darken a church doorstep, that are antagonistic to it. But they're like, oh, you think that. Oh, like, you know what I mean?
Yes,
and it's that.
I know exactly what you mean.
But they trust you. And it's like, all of a sudden, they'll give a listen to it as well. Sometimes, too, I'll often instigate. I love to do research. One of the things I've been researching recently is there's some great research, like out of the University of Virginia and other places, on near-death experiences. And does consciousness survive the brain? And there's some really compelling, a number of theologians and apologists have mentioned these as well because they're so compelling. And there's pretty strong evidence, scientifically, right, secular science, that when the brain can go offline, consciousness continues. And so it's, people say, well, what have you been, anything new you're doing? And I often mention, I've been researching that. Now that's incredibly interesting. Yeah. Everyone's like, oh, well, that's interesting. And that leads, if consciousness survives the brain for 5 seconds, it can survive for 5,000 years or 5 million years, right? That's the whole game right there. Now we're talking about an afterlife. And
talking about a soul, an eternal essence of who we are.
But you can leverage science as kind of the way in. So sometimes I'll do that, and people are like, oh, tell me about that. And then that naturally leads to...
Very few people truly believe that there's nothing but nature.
Right.
Most people look at themselves and know that there's more to them than simply the brain chemistry that's going on.
Yeah, but when you lead with the science, it's a powerful apologetic tool because now it gives them permission to go, I always thought that. And now you open the door to faith in Christ and what that really means. And, it's powerful, but it's getting people receptive, and then how do I springboard into those kind of conversations? Sometimes they happen through things going in their lives. Sometimes I just try to knock on the door a little bit, and people open it because it's interesting. Who doesn't want to know, like, well, what does the science say about that? And you share, like, oh, wow. And now we're having a conversation about the afterlife.
Mm-hmm. And that takes a little bit of courage, too, to go through those doors. And we always have that voice inside that's going, don't do that. That'll be embarrassing. Or you'll probably trip all over yourself or say something stupid. And, there's always that hesitation factor. Again, going back to risk. Yeah. And yet God's people are called to be lights in darkness. We have to be a gospel witness. When those doors open, be faithful to go through and just say, well, Lord, maybe you'll do something. I don't know I may not be the one that says, okay, let's all, heads bowed and eyes closed and let's have an invitation. But somewhere down the line, if this is a work of God, the Holy Spirit is drawing that person to them. My testimony could be the thing that makes them more susceptible when they hear it from someone else as well. Yeah. So we can all be just a part of that process that God's using. I appreciate so much your contributions to this conference and your willingness to sit down with me today on the podcast. I think it's been incredibly compelling and interesting. I'm sure a lot of people will definitely want to get in on your book. I want you to give the titles and where they can get that on, I'm sure, Amazon and probably everywhere else they can go.
Yep. It's the Science of Selling, and then Sell More with Science is my newest one, and they are available anywhere fine books are sold.
I like it, which is everywhere except for actual bookstores, which really don't exist anymore.
That's right.
Thank you so much for being on the podcast.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you for joining us today. On Mission is a production of Maranatha Baptist University. Subscribe to On Mission on Apple, Google, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts. Don't forget to leave a review, as this will help other growing leaders find these conversations. For information about our guests, previous episodes, and general information about On Mission or MBU, go to mbu.edu/podcast. Join us again next week as we examine what keeps leaders on mission.